Very happy to see that a lot of people have signed up, that there is a lot of interest in the topic of social norms. The Beam Exchange, together with Partner, has been working on the importance of social norms in gender-related questions and on women economic empowerment now for over a year. With this webinar, we want to think beyond questions on gender and explore the importance of social norms for market systems development in general. My name is Jenal. I'm very happy to moderate this webinar. I am a partner at MesoPartner, a company that specializes in knowledge creation and advice on economic development, innovation, and decision making. I'm really happy to lead you through this webinar today. This will be an interactive webinar. Please do use the chat box on the side, on the right-hand side. You can ask questions. Please introduce yourselves so everyone can see who is here. We will pick up your questions and try to answer as many as we can during the Q&A session in the second half of the webinar. Also, if anything isn't working technically for you, if you don't understand us well, please use the chat box. We have also technical support that will be able to help you. We also would like to invite your feedback at the end. There will be a survey that will pop up when you leave the webinar. Beam is recording the webinar in order to put it online afterwards, so you'll have a chance to come back to it or recommend it to colleagues. Now let me introduce today's presenters. I'll start with Erin Markel. She is a principal at MarketShare Associates and is leading MSA's Economic Empowerment Practice Area. She has also recently led a year-long research initiative of the Beam Exchange on unpacking gender social norms in market systems. And she also co-developed the MSA's new Disrupting Systems Dynamics framework. Then we have Sabrina Haque. She is Marketing and Brand Specialist at USAID's Agriculture Value Chains Project in Bangladesh for DAI. She has been working in the development sector for the last 7 years, where she manages various activities around private sector engagement strategies. Sabrina did her Master's in Development Studies and has worked for CARE Bangladesh for 5 years before joining AVC. We also have Fahd Georgy with us. He is also working on the AVC project together with Sabrina. He has 8 years experience in project management with a focus on market systems development and M4P and different agricultural value chains. He has worked before for Catalyst, CARE Bangladesh, and UK8 in Bangladesh. But without further ado, I would like to hand over the microphone to Erin, who will start us off with her presentation.
Great, thanks Marcus. Can you hear me okay? Because I know I was having some sound issues.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So hi everyone, and thank you Marcus, and also the Beam Exchange, and good morning from sunny Denver, Colorado. As Marcus said, my name is Erin, and I'm a principal consultant at MarketShare, and our firm specializes in economic development and market systems support. So just to jump right in today, because I know I only have about 10 or 15 minutes, I want to talk today about systems, norms, and markets, and how they interact. And MSA has really learned a lot about how norms work from a gender perspective from the research we were doing with the Beam Exchange. But we've also been applying these lessons and looking at it in a much broader sense, which is what I want to talk about a bit today. So, hold on one second. I'm not getting the slide change. There we go. So first, I just want to talk quickly about why norms in market systems. Why are we even talking about this? So changes in norms and what we found really are a key indicator in the depth of systems change. And what this means is that norms have a strong influence on how market systems function, and that norms We know that there are kind of deeper change that happens within a market system because of the difficulty, or what social norm theorists call kind of quote unquote the stickiness of changes in norms. So I want to go through that a bit more right now. So in our new framework that we developed under the USAID-funded Leveraging Economic Opportunities initiative called Disrupting System Dynamics Framework, I don't want to get everyone overwhelmed by this slide because there's a lot to unpack here, and basically I think this is a whole other in and of itself. But the interesting thing to talk about here is just how it relates to norms. So in our study, when we were putting this framework together over our 3 years of research, what we found is that systems change really have kind of deeper or more shallow level changes. And it really works like an iceberg, if you take that example, whereby changes to a system can be more complex and less visible, or quote unquote stickier, as you move down to the bottom of the iceberg. And we believe that changes in norms are really the deepest indication of systems change, which is why you see it there at the bottom. So basically, our framework shows how sticky a change to a norm can be. And it highlights that when a change is happening at this level, it can be more likely to be sustained, or in other words, less likely to snap back as the system evolves over time. So quickly, sorry about that. Quickly, I just want to briefly introduce people to system dynamics and what system dynamics are, and talk a bit more about why this is relevant to norms. So when we're talking about system dynamics, it's really important to know that systems are constantly evolving, and really that happens with or without our interventions. And due to this dynamic interaction between what we like to call agents, and agents are individuals, single businesses, other market actors, and these collective level pieces. And these are kind of really the rules or properties that emerge from the interactions between these different agents or actors. So I think this is important because a lot of measurement and discussion around systems change is really focused on the agent level, and has kind of ignored or haven't talked as much about this kind of collective aspect of systems. And I think this actually is quite true from a social norms perspective as well. And I just want to talk a minute about the alignment between kind of systems discussions as well as norm discussions. So norm theorists, in my perspective, tend to talk about norms in a similar way, which I think is really interesting. So norms really emerge, if you can see from this diagram, as kind of this overlapping or interaction between the individual and their attitudes and beliefs, and this kind of social side of kind of the networks and rules and structures that happen on a social level. That's where social norms emerge. So I think this is really interesting because this really shows you that there's this interesting alignment and kind of synergy between how system properties emerge and how norms are created and changed. And I really don't think this is by accident, because I think norms are very much at the heart of how systems evolve. So it really makes sense to me that their, if you want to call it like their creation stories, are very linked. So a quick plug with this diagram, which I think is interesting, is this is a presentation taken by Ben Kislagi, and he's a social norm expert from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, who's working with our current Beam practitioner working group on social norms and how they influence market systems, together with another social norms expert, Holly Bushenka from the University of California, San Diego. And I'm just mentioning this as a quick plug because I think you should keep your eyes open, because our practitioner working group is going to produce a paper on this, hopefully coming soon, crossing our fingers. But it will kind of be getting into a bit more depth on this particular issue. But to move forward, I just want to talk a little bit about how MarketShare has been defining norms in our market systems work. And I think a couple of things come out that are really important and have practical implications. One is that individual behavior is really only one aspect of norms. The other, like we talked about, is this collective behavioral rules that shapes people's behavior, A, but also shapes how people expect others to behave, which is very important to remember, because this expectation can really change how people actually wind up behaving. So it's really thinking about social norms as this kind of mediating between individual preferences and the notions of what are socially acceptable. So over the years, I've been asking myself a bit about what are social norms versus what are market norms. And sometimes you hear lots of different language being thrown around in our field and also in kind of more social fields. And I think I want to bring up kind of two questions to break this down a little bit. So one, are norms inherently social? I think this is a really interesting question. And I think one way we can talk about that too, as related to our work, is that markets are really social constructs, right? And I think that's important to remember. And then on the other side, norms are really inherently social because they do emerge as this interaction between individuals, right? They don't exist unless you have these kind of collective systems that are holding them together and creating them. So what then, secondly, does that mean for this distinction between kind of the social and market norms, and is this distinction helpful? And in my work, I really have found that this distinction between the social and market norms might be a little bit of a false dichotomy. And I think it can be a bit misleading to call it a market or a business or an economic norm. But I think what actually is true and helpful is to talk about how social norms interact with market forces and interact with market incentives, and how these economic incentives change people's ways of reacting to already set social norms. So I think this sounds like a very detailed nuance, but I actually think this can really help us better formulate our research and identify the root barriers to promoting inclusive markets. So I want to give an example of this. And many of you have probably already heard this example. Sometimes it's helpful to hear it, I think, in a different context. But if you've read Freakonomics, you've probably heard of this example, but there's this great daycare example in Israel where parents are frequently late to pick up their kids from daycare, and the daycare tried to fix the problem by charging tardy parents an additional fee. But what they found, right, is that when they put these tardiness charge in, that the opposite happened of what they expected. They thought the number of late pickups would greatly decrease, but instead it went way up. And so why did this happen? And why did this happen in the context of what we're talking about? So parents really have a whole set of non-financial incentives for being on time, right? And this greatly relates to social norms, because there are sanctions, like social norm theorists like to call it, for parents on the social side for them showing up late. They have shame from their peers of making the teacher wait. They probably have shame and frustration from the teacher that come on to them. But from the financial incentive and introducing a new financial incentive, this actually forced people to change their behavior. And it actually allowed them to avoid this shame, because then they could basically pay their way out of it. So I think what this example shows us is the importance of understanding social norms and how they interact with economic incentives to produce certain outcomes. And I think it shows us also the importance of, when we tinker with market systems and introduce new economic incentives, if we don't understand some of these social identifiers, we could really get ourselves in a tricky place. And I just want to point out too that the outcome of this experiment could have been completely different in a different context that had different social norms. So what does this all mean for our practice? And so I want to use a little bit of a silly example, and I am definitely not an expert in basketball, so I might get some of this terminology wrong, but I actually think this example is extremely enlightening. This actually was shared with me by friend Tim Sparkman recently, and we were just having a little bit of back and forth on what this means for our work. So I'm going to kind of play around with this example, and you guys can tell me if this works or not. But I like this. So there was a super famous basketball player, Rick Barry, and he played professional basketball in the 60s and 70s, and he had an incredible free throw record, right? So when there's a foul, he'd shoot free throws, and he had something like a 90% free throw mark, which I guess is unheard of. But he didn't shoot free throws like everybody else. You can see the picture on the left is what a typical basketball player does, right? They bring the ball up to their head, and they push up and over into the basket. But he shot like the guy on the right. He did an underhand throw through his legs. And actually, what was found over the years, and this has been proven again and again, and there's lots of stats and research actually to show this, is that players who switch from using the kind of typical method to using the underhand method, kind of through the legs, can really increase their shooting practices and really increase their free throw marks. And even, great basketball players like Wilt Chamberlain actually did this. And there's lots of stats to show when he changed that he had a much, much better record. However, players continue not to use this, even though they have the information that's available, all the stats that's been available from the 60s and 70s, and there's role models who are even showing people that this can work. So why is this happening? Why aren't basketball players taking this on? So one thing is that this style has really been labeled granny style. So players see it as uncool and they see it as very strange. And there's a very strong social norm and behavioral expectation are in place about shooting in this kind of quote-unquote normal way. And the view on what's cool, interacting with these kind of social sanctions from peers and fans about being deemed uncool, is forcing players to not take up this new way of shooting that makes logical and research-related sense. And it also could be interacting with different economic incentives, whereby being deemed uncool could have economic repercussions around fame and potential sponsorships. So I think this could be a very interesting study to break down in terms of what's influencing this behavior around norms and economic incentives. And I think one thing that this points out that's really, really important is that, information and even role models aren't always enough to change behavior. It's not enough for people to have good information. And I think what's also important to point out here is that you have to identify the different reference groups, as it's called in social norms theory, basically the groups that are surrounding that person that are constraining or promoting different types of behavior. And so, who would be the reference groups in this example? Basically, it would be, of course, the coach. You'd also be looking at the fans. You'd be looking at other peers, and you'd be looking at anyone else who is influencing the player's choice not to take on this new positive behavior. And then you'd want to look at how these groups are influencing the behavior of this player and how strong is that influence, which is an important point. Which, influencer or reference group actually is really kind of making this behavior sticky. Okay, so then you want to know how this behavior is being shaped, and you want to look at kind of creating those supports to help create kind of positive deviance, of these players. So that's just an example to talk through on kind of how this might work out and what are some of the important aspects to look at. So quickly to wrap everything up, there's a couple of key points I want to mention. So first, what does this mean for our programming? This means, one, social norms and economic incentives interact to influence behavior. And this can be of firms, this can be of individuals. And secondly, providing good information and demonstrations to people or to firms is not always enough to change behavior. Third, collective rules and expectations have a strong influence on people's behavior. So you have to really understand how others are expecting other agents within that system to behave, because people react to expectations. And lastly, we have to understand the strength or the stickiness of these norms and the influence of those different reference groups to really be able to understand the incentives and how to influence them. So moving forward, what should we consider? Like I said already, providing good information demonstration is not enough. Don't assume that. Identify potential social norms and economic incentives up front and think about how that can be a constraining positive change, but also don't assume that those are always going to stay consistent and same over time. Be very open to the fact that these could change and shift. And so you're really going to want to use kind of a hypothesis testing approach or a piloting approach to your work. You want to look at social norms from a community and collective perspective, not only looking at individual beliefs. That's not going to be able to give you the information you need. And once you name these norms, you want to be able to identify who are these different reference groups that influence these norms and then be able to unpack those incentives. And so you might not be working directly with the people who you want to change. And that could be either a business or an individual or whoever, but you really want to know who's constraining their behavior and make sure you're working with those people as well. And then you also want to understand bias. And this really pertains to norms in a lot of different ways. But one way I love to talk about is kind of current situation bias, which is, people only know what constrains them in their current situation. And as things change, they're not going to be able to predict what those norms are that are going to constrain them in different roles and in different opportunities. You can't only look at exactly what's going on now. You need to start looking at what could happen when things change and start also looking into that as well. And then you have to obviously understand, as things change, there's going to be potentially new sanctions and new risks that come with, pushing people into new markets or into new types of behaviors, which leads me to my last point, which is that unexpected change always happens. And so we're always a huge fan of being ready to learn and adapt. So on that note, I think I'll end there, and you can hear from our colleagues, Georgy and Sabrina, from a very, very practical example. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erin. I thought this was really interesting, learning that information and role models, even together with economic incentives, might not be enough to shape behavior. But now let's pass on the baton to keep with the metaphors from the sports world to Sabrina to see how their project applies this kind of thinking on social norms in their project.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Hi, Sabrina, we hear you well. Please carry on.
Okay. So, hi everyone. Good afternoon and good evening from Bangladesh. This is Sabrina from USAID ABC project. So we'll be talking about more like the market, the ABC. To give you a brief introduction about our project, is we work more in a market system approach and an agriculture. To the agriculture system, and mostly we are focusing on the southern delta of Bangladesh. And through this presentation, we will be talking about how we try to identify the informal norms, or we try to focus we try to work on the informal norms in the market system approach. It's not about how we want to change the norms, but rather we try to find out the problems, to find out the underlying causes for a certain behavior that occurs to the informal norms, which can be mitigated through different market system approaches. So we'll start with the first slide, which is like markets are complex in social system. Just like what Erin said, that there are, if we consider an iceberg, there is a pattern, and like every iceberg, there's something goes in the below, which ultimately affects, which whatever happened in the underlying of the water level, that affects people can see virtual level, people can see from the above point. So in the pattern in this slide, we'll be more considering we're considering 4 areas which are part of the complex social system, starting with flows, structure, rules, and biases. So taking the example of Bangladesh, if we start with the biases, we will see that there are a lot of there are authority biases, loyalty biases, and relative value biases. So if we start with the authority biases, we can draw one example from one of our value chain, which is we are working with 8 crops, and one of the crop we are working is in mango. So in 2014, it was a challenging year for Bangladesh, where all the mango traders, all the entrepreneurs who are in the mango business have to face a big chunk of loss, because there was a hype created that the mango farmers or the mango entrepreneurs, they provide chemicals, which is mostly the name as a formalin, and through this chemical, which is not which is bad for the health, and the traders provide this formalin in the mango and sell it in the market for which reason consumers and the end market, they withdraw themselves, they stop purchasing the mango, and as a result, almost all over the country, the producers or the traders who were in the mango business have to have a big chunk of losses. So what we did is, we as a ABC project, we try to do our series of roundtable. We organize a series of dialogue in the district in different parts of the area, especially focusing on the south, as we are working in the southern part of Bangladesh, along with district administration agencies and different market actors in the dialogue, and we work on the issues like the formalin, which is being named, the news which has been coming in the media, like uses of formalin and other chemicals which are not correct. Because if we talk about formalin, it is not possible for farmers to use formalin in the mango, because scientifically a percentage of formalin is already usually present in the mango. What they probably use is the carbide, which is okay from the in terms of health and in terms of rules and regulation, but the difference is the percentage of uses of carbide. So there are certain percentage of carbide the mango farmer can use to protect their mango from being rotten. So we come up with a series of dialogue with the district administration, so that the law enforcement community, like police and other lawyer, they do not harm the traders or the market actors, traders or the mango farmers, and do not spoil their mango, do not destroy their mango in the market. Because there were a few newses which came up in that same year, 2014, where police authority destroyed thousands and bulk stones of mango in the street, in the road, calling them that these traders and these farmers are of the mango they are carrying and they're sending to the city or the retailer market they have used chemical or formalin. So after the impact of that dialogue was, after we are done, after we completed the dialogue session, after the news came in the media, so whenever right after that program, whenever a farmer or a trader used to send mango from their area to the market, so if the law enforcement stopped them or tried to destroy their mango, they used to call their authority, or they used to refer their dialogue or the district commissioner and say that our district commissioner just had information, provided us information that the carbide we use has a minimum level. We have the authority to use it, but it has a percentage and we are maintaining that percentage. So another problem, there was another issue during that time, is the measurement or the actual measurement of the testing material, the testing machine of the formalin which is being used by the authority in Bangladesh is a wrong testing machine they have used for the fruits. So all this, so when we did the dialogue, it helped the authority to move from their biased information. So they realized that the machine they are using is not appropriate. The equipment they are using is not appropriate for the mango. It is more appropriate for the ear testing. So the result they used to get is from the ear. It's not from the mango or the fruit they were testing in that area. So that authority, that biases lead to that flows the information in the other area, that information in the other area, which help the trader to do their business properly in the next few years. After 2014, from 2015, the traders could actually do their business. They could actually sell their business without facing such problem. And on the other hand, consumer became aware that there's no such formalin in the market, which people used to know as a health hazard as a bad for their health. And on the other hand, the chemical they use, which is called carbide, is actually can be used by the traders, and it is okay to use by the farmers in order to save their mango rodent. So if I go to the next, next slide, it is more like more extractive to the more inclusive. What we are as a project ABC, what we are trying to do is we are trying to move the market system into more inclusive system rather than more inclusive system. Right now, if we see the scenario, it is more in the middle of extractive, and it is in the middle of extractive and inclusive. So there are the flows, the structure, the human factors which are related to the pattern. It's like it's in extractive area, but we're trying to make the market system more inclusive through the following ways, which is like inclusive market systems, which is like bringing expanding the network biases, and also relational network biases, and also increasing the business strategy bias. So if I talk about here, Bangladesh more into loyalty driven, because in terms of business strategy, the private companies are private sector companies and the market, they're more into increasing their value addition services. They are doing there are some wonderful examples we have, which are like adding value to your business, adding value to their product, adding value to customer loyalty. But when it comes to increasing or expanding their network, expanding their relation, it is still in the extractive area, or it is still in the patronized driven. So if we can expand this area, if we can expand the network, then we believe that it will be easier to attain, it will be easier to reach it will be easier to do an inclusive market system. It will be easier to do inclusive market system approach. So to do this, currently we are seeing the foreign the problem lies in the following areas, which are like informal norms. So in the informal norms, it is more like individual and farm level problem that farms mostly face. We have observed there are hierarchy and social mobility problems, and there are also cooperation and competition responses. So here I will give you some example how ABC is working in each of this area. So in terms of individual and farm level, we have often seen that whenever we, as a project, whenever we have spoken to any private sector, whenever we have reached any private sector to make a sustainable linkage with our activity, we have seen that the private companies or the local companies which are operating in Bangladesh have a very closed mindset, or in other words, they have a closed and conservative mindset. They prefer more like they want to hold their business in a very close circumstance. They do not want to share their their idea, or they do not want their good practices to be shared by the other firms in the same sector. For example, this problem is not only relies in the company's management system, but it also relies in the farmers level as well. It's like there is a big chunk of a trust problem. The trust problem relies is when we talk with the private sector to work with the farmers, or when we approach them to work with us to make a sustainable linkage, the first question which arises from the private sector and farmers is that what can you ensure, or what as a project or what ABC can do to ensure that they can trust the farmers? And on the other hand, farmers said what project can do in order to create a trust for them towards the private sector. So there is a big problem in the there is a problem in the trust level that farms usually do not. Farms try to operate it that by themselves. For example, if a farm working in a groundnut business or a farm in a food and beverage business, they when they meet with their other competitor or the same type of business in another platform area, they hardly talk about any business related issue, rather than they talk about a lot of other issue, but they don't feel comfortable, or they think that it's not wise to talk about the same business things with the person or the other company which is their competitor. So here what we try to do, that ABC came up with an activity, with an intervention which is called peer-to-peer accelerator model. So through the peer-to-peer accelerator model, we try to bring the same sector people together in the same space. It can be starting from farmer, trader to the company of a particular crop. They come and they sit in the same area, under a same platform. They talk about their business, and they talk about their business. They talk about the challenges they face, the quality issue, the supplier issue. As a result, the barriers they have in terms of the barriers they have in terms of hierarchy, or in terms of the relationship between farmers and company, supplier and company, that we, through the peer-to-peer accelerator program, try to mitigate. On the other hand, there are some social mobility and hierarchy problems. So oftentimes we have seen that in Bangladesh, you will find women working mostly in the ground level, which is you will find them working in the seedling level, they're working in the harvesting area, they're working in the, even in the garments level, they're working as a helper or in a operation level. But as you move towards their hierarchy of, if you see their HM pattern, you will find very less female are working in the mid level, and a very negligent amount of working in the senior or top management level. So through ABC project, though gender is not our main focus, but we try to bring in gender to multiple crop sector like flour, groundnuts, and potato, where women are working fully from the harvesting to the seedling to the harvesting area, but women are yet to reach to the market. They're still couldn't make their space in the market. They still couldn't place themselves in the market to sell the product. So here we are trying to sensitize the women to help them coming up in the market. We help them to, from the farmer, helping this woman to become a retailers as well. And the third one, which is like cooperation and competition response. In the competition sector, we're helping the private sectors like input companies and different input companies to work with their dealers and retailers in like a partner. It's like instead of input companies going directly to the farmers and talking about their product, we will helping this company to make their dealer and retailer as a part of their business, helping facilitating how this input companies can help the retailers and dealers to grow their business, as well as make them loyal to their company, so that these retailers and dealers can represent themselves to the farmers level, in the value chain level, and not only sell their business but sell their product, but also can grow their business in their community, in their sector, which will also help other small businesses to work under this dealer and retailer and help their farmer to create a trust. To create a trust for the dealer and retailer, which is a bit missing in the agriculture sector. So in the next slide, which is more like a strategy biases, if we here the value addition growth bias, Bangladesh is doing a wonderful growth in this area. I mean, in terms of farm growth, Bangladesh is working, Bangladesh is coming out, I mean, the companies, the private sector in Bangladesh, they are coming up with great marketing and branding practices. But one of the area where we help these companies to think is that instead of being product oriented, we're helping them to think about more a consumer oriented product. I mean, focusing their product into more like which consumer prefer more, rather than pushing their product to sell to the market. Secondly, we are helping the firm to do a number of market research and investment, which helps the firms to create customer relationship and retain their customers. We're also helping them to maintain a proper supplier relationship, like supplier relationship, which is because a proper supplier relationship can help mitigate the problems in the value chain, will mitigate the value chain we will mitigate the supply chain problem, and also backward and forward linkage market problem, which mostly country like Bangladesh faces when they try to bring product from the farmer's gate to the retailer's market. So this one, it's about the common theory of 80 and 20%. So if you see the example of asymmetrically codependencies, here the blue one, which is like out there, in English we call traders, we see that traders are more working, I mean, more focused for the group of farmers rather than they're working with, rather than, traders, rather than one trader, sharing their business or working or creating or, rather than traders being working in a, rather than maintaining a communication between the trader group. So through the peer-to-peer program, we try to bringing all the traders together so that all the traders can work together. They have a bonding and they can work as a group. So when the group, when there will be a group of traders can come as a under same platform, a lot of the challenges they face in their area, in terms of transportation, in terms of government rules, the bargaining power increases, and it also helps them to mitigate a lot of problems which might not have been possible for individual traders to do it. So wrap up with our last two slides is like what ABC is doing. So we're trying to increase the role of stakeholder method to deal with threats and opportunity. So through the different stakeholder engagement program, we are trying to reduce the threat or the trust issue or the distrust issue among the groups, and trying to create opportunities for all the group of traders, SMEs or businesses to come together and improve their business strategy and improve the total sector. Increased role of lead firms as a means of improve the value chain government, like the platform, I mean, the more they will be able to talk with each other, the more there will be a networking, the more network will be expand, the transparency between themselves will increase, the business transparency will increase, which it will also increase the trust, and it will also help the businesses to grow more in an inclusive system. So I think I'm like almost, so this would be the, so starting with the, so ending our last slide is like we're trying to adopting strategically, we're trying to managing the market actors. So we are trying to create an environment where the market actors can self-select the other actors from the network to make it commercial viable, and also trying to facilitate the informal changes so that through the facilitation the biases can reduce and they can the buses can reduce and they can expand the network among themselves vertically. So when the vertical network will expand, it will definitely help a market system to work in more.
Thank you very much, Sabrina.
So that's it from our end.
We'll have a couple of minutes for questions. I got a couple of questions before the webinar, and I got a couple of questions now during the chat. Thank you very much. I got quite a few questions on gender and gender norms. In the interest of time, and given that this topic has been already discussed in another webinar, I'm not going to ask those questions, but we'll try to ask the questions that go beyond gender. And I'll start with the question by Molly Liesner in the chat, from the chat box, and it was to Erin. So if she asked if breaking or deviating from a norm doesn't bring any negative consequences, or when there are no sanctions against breaking a norm, is it still a social norm? Or is this question of bringing in sanctions or no sanctions helpful to distinguish between social norms and other norms?
Great, Marcus. I guess I'll just jump in and answer that. So Molly, first of all, I think that's a very interesting question, and it definitely takes a little bit for my brain to work through that and work through an example and think about it a bit more. So I appreciate the question. I think if a norm does not have negative consequences or sanctions that are attached to it as you start to see changes, I think a couple of things come to my mind. One, not all reference groups will sanction deviance from a norm. So I think that's important to understand, because there are also, what we call supports and sanctions. So you might see that some reference groups will support deviance from the norms, which is a lot of times kind of what we'll be looking for. But I think it is probably atypical to not see some form of sanctions if it truly is a norm. So there's a couple of questions that come to my mind, which would be, one, it might not be a norm. It could just be a common belief, which is a little bit different. And the other thing is that it could be a norm but has very low strength, or is not kind of quote unquote very sticky. So the flexibility that people have with that norm might be quite high. So that would be my answer. So I don't know if it means that it's not social. I think it probably just is more related to the strength, or that it just might not even be a norm at all. I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I think that that's where my mind went with what you were saying.
Thank you very much, Erin. I think it is important to make this distinction between social norms and beliefs, and be clear whether this is actually a social norm and it's expected by others that that people behave like that, or if it's in a way a common belief that where people don't have the necessary information, or stemming from education systems that might not be up to date. I want to direct the next question to Sabrina or Georgy, from whom we haven't heard yet, so we might be able to hear from him something. It's from Kate Fletcher, and I'm rephrasing it a little, but essentially she asks that for the case of Bangladesh, given that heterogeneity of the population and only finite resources that your project has, is it possible to take into account different types of norms or social norms, and different types of influences like religious, ethnic, gender norms, and so on, and then obviously the market incentives and all the influences from the market? How far can you actually take up all these different influences in your project? So either Georgy or Sabrina.
Yeah, thank you. Quite an interesting question, I'd say. Basically, if we talk about our project, ABC, we have a gender focus, but not exclusively talking about how to include gender in the total market system and all, but we do believe in inclusivity of the market. So as Sabrina has presented, we have been trying to build the market system and uh, take it to the level of inclusivity. Inclusivity, it's a big word. Basically, it takes the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem and probably from the very macro level of government interventions and everything to build that kind of inclusivity. But we have seen in Bangladeshi market, in many sectors, when the women's participation in agriculture, in agriculture and aquaculture and in livestock, the women's participation has been increasing. And this increasing participation, if you take 20 years back in Bangladesh history, this was impossible to think about for a woman to come out in the field and do some harvest or post-harvest related activities. But that scenario has been changed, and in that scenario, for sure, government and also the development partners have played a big role. And from our project currently in AVC, we have a gender sensitization activities where our gender and behavior change specialist especially goes into the market and then talk to different market actors. And through our intervention, we also try to gather people or market actors from different levels where gender is not the main focus. It means that we try to build an inclusive model, at least try to test an inclusive model. When we are able to do that kind of inclusivity, it actually opens the market space for anyone, regardless of gender, sex, ethnicity, or anything actually. So we have seen that this model, market system approach model, is particularly effective to to ensure the inclusion of gender rather than in many other approaches, conventional approaches. Where in the market system approach, as we believe in making sound in the market, talk about wider participation, building a trust-based relationship, and then the vertical and horizontal linkages, and then competition and healthy cooperation among the participants. So those kind of systems actually generate some sort of self-confidence at the lower level, at least at the poor producers and this poor SME level, and the SMEs become more open, and the farmers and the traders, they become open about the women participation. So we have seen that in dairy sector in Bangladesh, we have seen that, as Sabrina has mentioned, in many other sectors like in mung bean, in groundnuts, and many other sectors. But the only problem that we are seeing currently is now that probably there is a question whether the women inclusion happened due to the fact that they can be discriminated when it comes to their wages. They normally get low. They are normally lower paid women when they are compared to their counterparts. And another question is like they participate in production and post-harvest management, but whether they have a viable opportunity to use the money that they get from their businesses. So that kind of question is still remaining, but we are trying to actively engage with the market as well as the social system, and trying to raise the level of conversation between the actors, so that they themselves can define whether the 50% of the population who are female can contribute better in economic growth. So I'm not sure whether I have properly answered to Kate. I can follow on actually.
Thank you, Georgy. I actually want to have fire another question in your direction from Claire Hughes, who asks she asks in general whether there are yet programs that are sufficiently advanced to be able to generate evidence. But I want to ask you, to what extent have you been able within your monitoring system, or maybe with using external evaluation, to create evidence that you have published around your specific focus on social norm and biases, and whether this has been effective? Now, specifically for AVC.
Yes, specifically, I do not work for the M&E part. So currently, I cannot say in percentage or numbers, but from the program management perspective, we can obviously say that we have come up with a couple of sectors where women's empowerment or women participation, we have seen that it has increased than before, and probably the attribution can be difficult, and the MRM perspective can always come in and then have their different lenses to measure the effectiveness of our intervention. And as I also can see the question here, she also talked about young women's empowerment by using social norms approach. But in our AVC project, the only thing that we have been promoting is the inclusivity of market from the very beginning, actually. So, and when we talked about this wider participation in the market, we have tried to encourage women's participation subtly and also sometimes explicitly. And there are some natural ground where women are more comfortable. Say, for example, our take in the flower sector has been more successful than any other sectors, because in flower, that is related to the total environment related to flower production and marketing has been patronized by the women force, and there has been some really good success cases in flower sector where women coming up with even online marketing of flowers in Bangladesh, and they have been successful. So yes, I would agree that there are more scope of measuring those impacts, and probably by the end of our project, we will be able to come up with couple of case studies and couple of success stories also. But yes, from M&E perspective, a third party audit or third party research can always happen, but that depends on the donor's mandate and many other issues also.
Thank you very much. I would like to wrap up the Q&A session with the last question from my side. Do you think it is legitimate for us as development agents to judge social norms as being right or wrong, or appropriate or not appropriate in a given context, and try to change them into what we would call better social norms? Or isn't that to a certain extent quite paternalistic? I'm looking for volunteers from the presenters to answer this question.
Well, Marcus, this is Erin. I'll jump in, since I guess Georgy and Sabrina were just talking, but hopefully you guys have more to say about this as well. I think there's a huge risk of that, actually, and I think it's something we have to be very, very careful about, which is looking at kind of what's positive and negative, and even thinking that we can predict how some of these changes are going to unfold and happen. So I think something that's really, really important because of that is that we have to have a really good upfront understanding of what some of those support and sanctions might be from different reference groups as we promote different types of changes. And I think kind of coming in with a bit more of an open mindset, also using kind of a learning-based approach, and listening and working with the actors that you're working with becomes even more important. So I think when people come in and just immediately assume that there's a certain social norm that has negative effects for a community, I think that is already a dangerous approach. So it's really kind of coming in and unpacking kind of what's happening within that community and why that's happening, and really listening to those local voices around the social norm aspect. And then from there, kind of taking much more kind of a hypothesis testing, piloting approach, similar to that Israeli daycare example that I talked about, is you don't always know exactly what the different types of incentives you're introducing and what those outcomes are going to be. So I think, alluding also to Claire's question too, I think having a very effective monitoring system that allows you to be more adaptable is incredibly important. And I don't think that we're there yet. And I think it's something we're pushing really hard on, is trying to figure out how you can look for these changes and how you can think about the kind of positive and negative and what that really means. But I think I would actually hope that everyone on this call and challenge you to start really thinking about that and using that in your work so we can start to collect some more of this evidence.
Thank you, Erin. I would like to give Georgy or Sabrina the opportunity to say something to answer to this question briefly, but also pointing out that we're actually at the end of our hour, so please be brief. I know it's a difficult question. Georgy, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, basically, from our project, we do not try to define any norm, good or bad as such. Rather, what we try to do, mostly what we try to do is to set up examples and then try to engage stakeholders and market actors to talk about their benefits and their growth. So what happens is, like, say for example, we have been working with several private sector partners where we have worked with them around marketing and branding. We have worked around holding different regional fairs to strengthen their relationship with the grassroots level. And when doing those fairs, actually, we try to inspire them to bring in different audiences who could be potentially their customers. Say, for example, people from different riverine small islands, what we in Bangladesh we call the chores. So we try to inspire the market to play a role where they can bring different set of people from different communities and then test the model itself. So our model so far has been successful from a programmatic perspective, like that. In different fairs we have seen equal participation from all parts of the society, where gender was not a barrier itself. And different companies, they have recognized the importance of holding such fairs and those sort of events at the rural level, where they can reach out to their participants and talk to them directly. And from that, probably, and from those things, and we also hold exclusive stakeholder engagement workshops taking different critical aspects of business. So in those workshops also we have seen the participation from female who are at par with their male counterparts and talking about business. So when the business or trading function comes at first, and then the identity of gender, it goes to the back of their mind. So they are having probably a better platform where they are not taking gender as a perspective, or they are coming out of their those kind of norms or belief systems and sharing among themselves regarding their business profit, business growth, and then total inclusivity. So from a project perspective, we are definitely not trying to inspire any norms, or we are not trying to say that this norm is good or bad. Rather, we are encouraging the partners to talk within themselves and find out which norm is creating a better platform for them, leveraging them good to go to the next level, and which norm is actually inhibiting their growth. And so they are the decision makers, whether they would try to break that norm or they would take the norm as one of their pillars for success. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgy. Thank you, everyone. I would like to close the webinar. First of all, I would like to thank very much for the active participation and the good questions. I'm sorry we couldn't answer all those questions, but I would like to point you to the LinkedIn group of the Beam Exchange, and I and encourage you to post your questions there. And I would also encourage the presenters to have a look and see whether there are some questions they might be able to answer or to engage in a discussion. Please click on the link Sarah just shared in the chat, and we can collect your survey, your feedback. And of course, I would like to thank our presenters for introducing their work to us. For me, it was extremely interesting and enlightening, and I hope the discussion around social norms and how they are relevant in our work in market systems development will continue. As Erin already said, there will be a practitioner research paper on the website, on the Beam website, anytime soon. So please keep coming back and look out for it. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day.